Peter, I'm just going to interrupt you. Those figures have just come in. Net migration figures have been published for the calendar year of 2022, and they were 606,000 people. Now, that is a lot lower than many people have been expecting. We expected around the 700,000 mark. 606,000 people. That'll be something of a sigh of relief for Rishi Sunak, for those who've been paying attention. But I'm sure you'd agree, Peter Carbell, for most people who've got lives, jobs, children, families, things to do, that figure is still going to be very shocking. That 606,000 more people coming to the UK in the last year than were there at the beginning of the last year. Your reaction?
Yes, indeed. That's the figure till the end of 2022, and it is very high. Not as high as we thought it would be, but yes, very high nonetheless. And I think there's going to be a lot of people saying, is the immigration system actually working in this country? Do we have enough capacity in terms of housing, in terms of jobs, in terms of education for their children, for example, within GPs, all public services, and the fact that we have the highest taxation as a proportion of GDP, as a proportion of what the country makes since the Second World War, and yet public services are just definitely under strain. So I think with this 606,000 number, that is very high. The government will be breathing a small sigh of relief. These figures, of course, come from the Office of National Statistics, which is independent of government. But I think Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister who works in the building behind me, and his boss, Suella Braverman, and her boss, Rishi Sunak, will be breathing a slight sigh of relief this morning, in that it's not kind of a million, but still it is very, very high.
Let me go to some more details from that Office for National Statistics publication. Total long-term immigration, more people arriving in this country, was estimated at around 1.2 million. That's going to be the headline of the papers tomorrow. 1.2 million people coming to the country in 2022. And emigration, people leaving the country, was 557,000. So net migration added 606,000 more people to this country. Most people arriving in the UK last year were non-EU nationals. That's 925,000 people, followed by 151,000 from the EU and 88,000 British people returning to the UK. Now, we know, don't we, Peter Carbell, that a lot of the conversation about Brexit was about us having control of our borders. That was the line, wasn't it? Very take back control. We wanted to control the number of people and who it was who came to this country. So it wasn't necessarily about we're going to cut immigration numbers, although that is what most people assumed that would mean. Government had said they wanted to cut to in the tens of thousands, i.e. under 100,000. As it is, since we've actually Brexited, not even the vote, since we've Brexited, we've seen, pretty much doubling of the number of people coming to this country. But most of those people are coming from outside the EU. Now, given that the government has complete control over whether someone who is a foreign national comes to this country, why have those figures increased so much? What are those numbers made up of?
I think a lot of people will be asking questions of the government in terms of saying where are the skill shortages, identify those, and bring in people who are, perhaps if you are going to bring in people, deal with those skill shortages. But there is quite a low number from the EU, as you say, certainly in comparison to the rest of the world. So there are a lot of questions to be asked here in terms of why so many people are coming and why they're allowed to come to this country as well, and how they're allowed to. There has been a crackdown has been announced even this week on graduates, for example, people coming for education courses, university courses, bringing their families. That will be curbed unless you're doing a PhD or above from next year, from January 2024. But the big issue really is there's so many ways in which people are coming to this country from so many different countries around the world. So there are a lot of questions for government, really, in terms of if we are taking back control of our borders. These figures don't seem to stack up with that. Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has previously said she wants it to get down to the tens of thousands, and but that seems a distant dream. David Cameron originally mentioned that over 10 years ago, and we're just nowhere near that at the moment.
No, exactly. And we're looking at annual visas that have been issued by Type, some figures that we've got for overall the number of people coming that have been, the figures before they were finalised and announced today by the Office for National Statistics. We are looking at, that is a huge number of people arriving in the country, and that is made up, including by things like 200,000 Ukrainians, give or take, 58,000 people from Hong Kong. Now, most British people, I think we've said polling shows, were very welcoming. They want people who, you know, they're fleeing a war in Europe, women and their children coming here on a temporary basis, we hope. Certainly, well, they'll want to go back to their home country, to their families, and people fleeing Hong Kong and Chinese rule. Hong Kong is being British passport holders entitled to come here. And then you're into the two different groups. You're looking to roughly, you know, 260,000 people working, bringing 155,000 dependents, so spouses and children. And we're also looking at 490,000 students, bringing with them 136,000 dependents. And as you say, the students, most of those, well, an awful lot of those will be postgraduate. And you said there is that link, there's going to be that limit on the number of those people who can bring family members in. We've seen a real explosion, particularly from some countries like Nigeria, of the number of people bringing in their dependents, bringing in spouses and children and other family members on those visas. There's been quite a debate about whether or not we should even include students in these numbers. The idea being, yes, but they go home. But if someone comes here on a year or 2 year course, postgraduate, and then they're entitled, as they are, to work for another 2 years, they still need someone to live for all that time.
Yes, indeed, and especially if you have that flow and you have that number of people. If they have children, they're going to need school places. If they have spouses, well, there are all sorts of ways in which they'll access public services that the rest of us do as well. And even if they leave, well, that will then be totted up in the emigration statistics later on. So there is a debate about how this is counted, but essentially there are a lot of people putting pressure on public services. I think most people in Britain aren't against immigration per se as an issue. They say if people want to come here from other countries, if they can afford to, if they can contribute to the economy in some way, and if there is room for them, and if they can contribute, if they can pay for public services, then that's all right. The problem is the scale of the numbers and the number of illegal immigration as well, which is a whole other issue.
And you have to look, I mean, the sheer numbers. Now, the figures we'd most likely to compare it to would be in 2021. So we had these original figures, 504,000 came by June 22. It's now 606 by December. But you compare that to June 2021, it was only 173,000. I'm not entirely sure that's a very accurate comparison there, is it? Because we know we still had an awful lot of COVID restrictions and travel restrictions in many countries, including here at that time. So I think a lot of those figures, it's difficult to make the comparisons. I'm wondering if that's the sort of thing that the government is going to say. But there's just no doubt at all, there's going to be huge pressure on this. Immigration, crime, the economy, these are the sort of things that Tory party, Tory governments, Tory oppositions, they beat the Labour in the polls on. Those are the things that people say, that's what I trust the Tories on. We've seen some figures yesterday showing that actually people now, on average, they're trusting Labour more than the Tories on immigration. And that is the worry. But I'm not quite sure how Rishi Sunak could go into the next election saying, yeah, we made you a load of promises. We didn't stick to any of them. We've been absolutely useless at managing this against all of what you've actually, as the people, told us repeatedly in elections and referendums that you won. But yeah, the other lot will be worse, so vote for us. Does that fly as an election campaign?
I don't think it does. I mean, Keir Starmer pointed out yesterday at the Prime Minister's questions that Rishi Sunak himself has stood on 3 manifestos saying that they're going to reduce immigration. The Conservative government just hasn't reduced immigration, to say nothing of the Brexit referendum, where the very simple pledge to take back control of our borders, law and money. And even with the laws, well, as we saw with Kemi Badenoch recently, there are many problems over those. With the money, well, look at the economy at the moment, although the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is saying that we'll do a bit better than some other countries, and they've revised their forecast. So maybe there's some green shoots in terms of things that are happening on the economy, but certainly in terms of our borders, there is a lack of trust in the Conservative government. We've seen that from polling today for Ipsos Mori, the respected polling company, and I think a lot of people will look at these statistics and say, well, these are not just numbers on a piece of paper. These are the times when people try to get a GP's appointment, for example, when they try to get their kid into a school and they can't, when they try to, when they look at a primary school class, for example, and see that 7 or 8 different languages are spoken in it. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but the problem is, of course, is accessing those public services, is getting the right outcomes for your family and for your future. And it's not being racist, it's not saying that you're against immigration per se, it's simply saying there is a capacity issue in this country in terms of the fact that if you add 606,000 people, well, there are going to be problems.
And again, I think it's a capacity and a culture issue. Again, absolutely bugger all to do with the pigmentations on one's skin, because I don't think that British people are racist. And again, when the whole debate for the last 20 years has been framed with, I'm a good person, I don't think we should have controls on the number of people who come here. You're a bad person and you're racist because you think there should be controls. You can't have a sensible debate. Well, I think the British people again and again in their elections decisions, their referendum decisions, said, well, we demand that debate. We demand to be listened to. Peter Cardwell, great to hear from you. I know you'll be talking to Mike Graham and others throughout the day. Those figures from the Home Office there.